maybe a private FDA, a good housekeeping seal of approval. It isn't that we don't want those protections, it just wouldn't be by the bureaucrats. And the FDA ends up being controlled by the drug companies. So, you know, in manipulation, oh, we're going to put this drug, we'll whisper to you, tomorrow we're going to accept this drug, and boom, there's an explosion in the drug prices, and there's a revolving door of FDA and drug company people. You know, it's just a bad system. So they're not our protector. The government can't be our protector.
What led you to make the decision to get involved in the campaign this time? I mean, you were at a point where you could reasonably say, well, I'm thinking about going home and just enjoying my family.
Yeah, and there was a lot of months, if not years, of people trying to persuade me. And it was always no, no, no. And it was the persistence and close supporters and close employees who said that some good could come of it. You know, it's time. But I imagine personally the subject where the strong motivation in 1974 had to do with monetary policy, this time probably my strongest concern was the atmosphere of war. The perpetual war, the endless wars that we have been fighting, and connecting that to the monetary policy. We fight these endless wars, we spend it and run ourselves in a deficit, and once again we're going to play havoc with our dollar. But I think it was the war that was going on in Iraq, what was going on in Afghanistan, and the potential war in Iran. And I thought, well, you know, this is pretty important to talk about, because it's in this atmosphere of war when people feel frightened and fear is built up, like the fear after 9/11, the fear of war. This is when people give up their liberties. Randolph Bourne said, war is the health of the state. And I don't want a big state. I want your freedoms to exist, and I don't like war for a lot of reasons. The money, the death, our deaths, their deaths, all the failures. So it was a war and peace issue that probably motivated me the most.
Do you think people live their lives too frequently in fear of whatever? I mean, is that a sort of constant state of human affairs now?
Yeah, I think so, but I think people who like big government concoct the fear. You know, they create the fear. You don't have the government, there'll be no safety net, you'll never have medical care, you won't have food, you won't have a house, you won't have education. You have to depend on the state. You have to depend on the government, never asking, where's the government going to get the money? What if they bankrupt the country after 30 or 40 years of this experiment? What will happen to our system if it collapses like the Soviet system? Then you know, fear is it. Fear domestically, it fell into the hands of those people who were trying to pass a lot of those laws even before 9/11. A lot of those provisions in the Patriot Act has been proposed before. So fear, they're going to get you. You know, do something. And the Congress said, I better do something. And goes on that fear. The Iranians are going to bomb us. We better spend $1 trillion on anti-ballistic missiles on this Russian border. No, we're totally broke, and now they don't even have a weapon, but people were about ready to do it with it. I mean, we had it in the bill a year ago, right when the Democrats came in, that said, which shouldn't have been necessary, but it said, Bush cannot bomb Iran without permission of the Congress, which he shouldn't anyway. And the Democrats removed it in the middle of the night. So here the Democrats are just elected on an anti-war policy, and behind the scenes they deliberately removed that from the from the bill, which means they gave a tacit approval of allowing Bush to do it. And that kind of stuff is very annoying, and annoys the American people too when they know about it.
But you are not in a position to affect much change or have much influence in Washington now. The campaign trail will play out however it plays out. I mean, you've had many, many, many years of being in D.C. without the ability to have much effect on policy. How has that affected you?
Well, of course, it's the badge of honor now. I mean, everybody thought what's he doing? He votes against all these bills. You know, I voted against all the bills 6 times more times than everybody else put together by myself. But now, that is, people introduce me and say he voted this some umpteen times against bills all by himself. He stood for the Constitution. Everybody, it's great. So the influence wasn't there, but there was an influence elsewhere because the people in Washington weren't ready for change. So it comes more slowly.
Why be there if you can't do something?
I feel like, you see, I think more long term.
Yeah.
I mean, short term. I don't expect that these bills will be passed. Matter of fact, I've always had a lot more influence than I ever dreamed I would. You know, I thought it would be much quieter and nobody in the 70s and 80s it was a lot quieter, and it was just me speaking out. But now that I put that book out on foreign policy, people are going back and reading all my speeches in 1981 when I was even amazed. I went back and read my stuff when we put the Marines in '83 into Lebanon. Highly critical before they went in, highly critical before we're there, and then Reagan finally removed those and said in his memoirs it was a serious mistake. People go back and read that now. So yes, back then you say, well, why do you say that? Why did you waste your time? You were the only Republican condemning it. But all of a sudden, long term, it has a great deal of meaning. And you say, wow, he said that in 1981.
You grew up in a time that was before the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, in which, and this was my generation, where you were suddenly thinking that the government was your enemy. You grew up at a time that was different in that. What is it that led you, as a young man, to having much more distrust than a lot of the people that your cohorts in your generation would have had toward their government? Anything in particular that you can think of during your maturing that led you to have a sort of a skeptical bent?
Well, I think the economics was one. When I saw that, read the truth, and saw the difference. But I also think in a personal, emotional level, it was the memory of war. I do remember World War II, and even though I wasn't into foreign policy, it was very emotional because we had a family in our church that had 7 or 8 children, and they had one boy, and he was the oldest. And he was drafted, and he was killed, which happened
this
a lot in World War II. And even though that didn't introduce me to the idea of foreign policy, but in other close members of the family died, and that had an impact. And I know when I was a kid, and I'd see war movies and know about this, that I knew I couldn't pick up a gun and shoot somebody. I mean, I just wouldn't be a good soldier. And over the years, I think it motivated me to go into medicine. I figured there would be a draft. I'd have to go, but I better take care of the wounded. I don't want to shoot people. And I ended up being drafted as a physician, as a flight surgeon. The World War and the Korean War, one of my teachers was called back to duty, went to Korea. He didn't come back. That war wasn't even declared. So as I evaluated that later on, he didn't have to be killed. He shouldn't have been there. We went there for the United Nations, and war wasn't declared. It was a violation of the law of the land that this guy got killed. In Vietnam, the same thing. Our next door neighbor. I was a resident at the time. Their boy went over. He was the oldest, and his dad was a lawyer, and he had planned to finish law school. He had been drafted and become a lawyer with his dad, and he was killed. For what reason? So that really had a powerful impact on me that you can't trust it. You can't trust our leaders. I mean, they undermine our economy and lie to us about the monetary system, and then they tell us we have to go and die to protect our Constitution? Start wars and kill people to protect our Constitution by not even following the Constitution? What hypocrisy.